Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Continuing the freshman spotlight series, going to go to the Clemson Tigers and talk about one of my favorite wide receivers going into his freshman year. That's going to be Bryant Wesco, and why I am so fascinated with Bryant Wesco year one within this Clemson program. Number one, loved what he was as a high school recruit. We talked about him 12 plus months ago when he committed to Clemson. The exact thing we said was, Clemson needs more of these kind of wide receivers. And then heading into 2024, Bryant Wesco might be one of those keys for Clemson to really unlock this offense in the 2024 season outside of the quarterback position and Cade Klubnik. If you were to ask me, what's the most important position that you need to see step up in 2024 for Clemson to go out and win an ACC championship, to go make a run in the college football playoffs? I think inarguably, unequivocally, it's going to be this wide receiver room, and specifically wide receivers like Bryant Wesco, where you look at Bryant Wesco, he brings the exact skill set that Clemson desperately needs within this wide receiver room. You have some known commodities, guys like Tyler Brown and Antonio Williams, when healthy, are elite wide receivers. Jake Bringenstool, one of the better tight ends that we see in the country. All of those pass catchers, they're kind of short, intermediate route tree kind of guys. None of those wide receivers are going to consistently work 20-plus yards down the field and really stretch defenses vertically. Clemson didn't really have that kind of wide receiver last year. That's evident in some of the numbers that you look at. 130 yards per pass attempt last year. Clemson really struggled to push the ball down the field. Bryant Wesco, he can change that for this Clemson offense as a true freshman. I think what's so fascinating about Bryant Wesco is the one concern we had about Bryant Wesco coming into Clemson, that he was a slender frame, right? He came in 6'2", 170 pounds, soaking wet, probably wasn't even over 170 pounds when he enrolled back with Clemson in January. You take a look up, the weigh-ins they just had a couple of weeks ago, clocking in at 182 pounds. We feel better about the physicality that Bryant Wesco can bring to the table. And so that makes you feel better about Bryant Wesco, being a guy that can contribute for Clemson as a true freshman. Want to get into a couple of different things. One, talk about how Bryant Wesco fits into this Clemson wide receiver room. Go back to some of the high school film, what we saw from the spring game. Talk about what Bryant Wesco can do to this Clemson offense. Really excited to get into it. Before we do it, as always, just want to say thank you to you guys and to the Clemson fans. It's been a blast talking this program over the last 12-plus months. We broke these guys down when they committed to Clemson over 12 months ago. Now we get to talk about them going into their freshman year. The amount of support y'all have shown the boys all offseason, it truly does mean a lot. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into Bryant Wesco. And again, I want to focus in on Bryant Wesco's skill set and how desperately Clemson needs this kind of wide receiver. There's three things that I really like about Bryant Wesco in terms of what he brings to Clemson. One is the size. 6'2", he is very long. He's not necessarily built like Adam Randall, but he has that catch radius like Adam Randall. And he has the ability to go up and make plays. And you go back to the high school film, Bryant Wesco is very comfortable in some of those contested catch situations, not necessarily because he's a massive physical presence like Adam Randall, but he's long, he's tall, and he knows how to play the football in the air. I think secondly, he's a burner. And this is a guy with an extensive track and field background, a very twitched up athlete for that size. He's going to be a guy that if you don't want to put a safety over top of Bryant Wesco, he can run by cornerbacks. He's going to make safeties respect what Bryant Wesco can do working vertically down the field. And I think finally, Bryant Wesco is elite at tracking the football. You saw that in the spring game. We're going to pull up that clip, but you also saw it all over the high school film. When that football is in the air, a lot of these young wide receivers who might be big and fast really struggle to judge the ball, adjust to the football. Bryant Wesco was all really good at those type of things. So with Bryant Wesco checking all three of those boxes, you're kind of excited that he can really provide value to this Clemson offense year one as a true freshman. We all know Dabo Swinney is certainly not afraid to play true freshmen on either side of the football. You take a look at that defense last year, half of that defense was run by true freshmen. If you are good enough to play at Clemson, it don't matter if you're 18 years old or 23 years old. Dabo Swinney is going to let you play. I think Bryant Wesco can play, and I think he will play for Clemson, and I think he can really unlock this Clemson offense. Now, before we get into the film, I just want to have a short conversation about how this wide receiver room and this pass catcher room, kind of shakes out for Clemson, where, again, you have Antonio Williams, when healthy, I think one of the better wide receivers in the ACC. You have Tyler Brown, played phenomenal as a true freshman. When healthy, very good football player. You have Jake Bringenstool. Again, all three of those wide receivers, really good football players. The only problem with them being your main contributors, all kind of similar pass catchers in terms of working the short intermediate route trees. Clemson last year didn't really have that kind of wide receiver that could take the top off of the defense, make defenses respect what Clemson could do doing the attack in the deeper third. So that impacts your offense in a couple of different ways. One, you're going to see defenses come down on this Clemson offense, which hurts guys like Jake Bringenstool, Tyler Brown, and Antonio Williams when you're seeing safeties kind of come closer to the line of scrimmage because they're not afraid of a wide receiver working vertically down the field. It's going to make it very congested for guys like Antonio Williams and Tyler Brown. And number two, you just want to hit more explosive plays. And if you have wide receivers that can attack 20-plus yards down the field, you're going to manufacture more explosive plays. Now, for Clemson heading into 2024, I think one of the more fascinating storylines, you got a couple of wide receivers that we have pegged as potential guys that can play that role. Adam Randall going into year 3, big, physical wide receiver that can really dominate at the catch point. We've seen Adam Randall flash. We haven't seen him put it together consistently. He's a guy that going into year 3 certainly could be that kind of wide receiver. And you got another freshman in TJ Moore, who I think we're going to take a look at too one of these times this week. He's another really big body with some functional athleticism that can work vertically down the field. In my opinion, Antonio Williams, Tyler Brown, and Jake Bringenstool, when healthy, are going to be great football players. You need at least one or two of those wide receivers that we just talked about, Adam Randall, Bryant Wesco, or TJ Moore, to really emerge as that kind of deeper third wide receiver within this Clemson offense. Why do I think Bryant Wesco can do that? One, he's going to be easy to get on the football field. First, he is really good in those combat catch situations. He was never the biggest frame in terms of build when he was at high school, but when you roll the film, he is so comfortable when that football is in the air, right? Working vertically down the field. He's one of those guys that if he doesn't have much separation, if you're a quarterback, you can just throw up the football. You see the adjustment, the coordination, the body control that Bryant Wesco has in the air. He's a guy that can make those kind of plays working vertically down the field. But I think secondly, what he can do operating after the catch. You continue to work through the film, but Bryant Wesco, he's not just a one-trick pony that can only work vertically down the field. This is a guy that you can get in space and let him cook in terms of yards after the catch. There are two ways to manufacture explosive plays in the passing attack. One is air yards. One is just throwing the football down the field. The second is finding a way to get your playmakers in space and letting them run after the catch. Garrett Riley was elite at this at TCU. You didn't see as much of it as we would have liked for Clemson in 2023. I think part of that had to do with a lot of safeties coming down into the box. Bryant Wesco is a guy that you can get him incorporated in a lot of different ways. Just jump off the screen. Two things that stand out. One, Bryant Wesco is a really smooth mover. He can make people miss with ease, but if you're a safety coming downhill, you take a bad angle. Bryant Wesco is going to run right by you. He has elite straight line speed, which kind of gives him that big playability. And I think lastly, when you take a look at the film, he's a smooth mover, not only with the football in his hands, but also creating separation within his route trees. And it's hard to find wide receivers who are 6'2", 170 plus that move the way Bryant Wesco does. He's a smooth mover. You're going to see kind of just a basic little speed out here. He's going to create separation. And then, hey, when he gets the ball in space, this is how you want to get Bryant Wesco involved. He's not just a vertical guy. He's not just a screen guy. He has a developed route tree. And when you can get him the football in this situation, you feel really good about your chances of him making people miss. And obviously nobody's catching him from behind. And Bryant Wesco can get involved in a lot of different ways. And I think what excites you the most is it's one thing to look at a kid at the high school level and say, all right, he's a really good football player. Can he translate it immediately to the college football level? We saw Bryant Wesco, from what you hear during spring practice and fall camp, you're hearing Bryant Wesco kind of showing out. But I think more importantly, we saw with our own two eyes during the spring game. You talk about, again, the body control, the ability to come up with some of those contested catches, how to track the football. This is not very easy to adjust and contort your body. Bryant Wesco makes it look easy. And so there's a lot of different ways that Bryant Wesco can get involved in this Clemson offense. But I think most importantly, and again, going back to the depth chart, this is a kind of skill set that Clemson desperately needs in the wide receiver room. I don't know if it's going to come from Adam Randall. I don't know if it's going to come from Troy Stellato, Brian Wesco Jr., TJ Moore, whoever it comes from. If you get that kind of wide receiver that emerges in this Clemson offense, it's going to mean really good things for this Clemson offense in general, and it's going to allow Cade Klubnik, I think, to really take a step in 2024. Brian Wesco, one of the most important true freshmen that we're going to see in 2024. I fully expect him to play a lot of football for Clemson. We'll cut it there. Probably going to look into TJ Moore next week. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.